Welcome to Uncloseted Conversations. Even if you stumbled upon this channel by accident, you are welcome here. The stories here are from my heart, from my soul, from my pen to your ears. I hope that you will stay a little longer and open yourself to the magic of storytelling. Here I write fiction, and though not always aligning with reality, it still tugs at heartstrings. Stories are escapes and sometimes a balm to the soul. So, enjoy your time here, and if reality presses down too loud and too hard, come knock at the door, come in, take a seat, grab a coffee, and just exhale. These are veil-bound stories, and the space is free and non-judgmental. Sit back, earphones or pods in, and let's listen to another exquisite romance. Shifted foundations. 3 feet of sand, 2 stubborn hearts, a rising tide, and 0 chance of staying calm or apart. Chapter 1. The Golden Shovel. The tide was late. Isla Vance noticed, because everything else was exactly on time. The wind moved at a steady coastal whisper, dragging salt across her lips like a quiet threat. The judges stood in their designated line, clipboards aligned with the horizon. Even the sun, sinking into its theatrical descent, seemed to understand its role in the spectacle. Only the ocean hesitated. Isla didn't look at it for long. The ocean was irrelevant until it wasn't. She crouched beside her structure, one knee pressed into damp sand, the other angled for balance. Her fingers, dusted in fine grit, adjusted the edge of a column no thicker than her wrist. A breath. A pause. Then the faintest mist from a spray bottle kissed the surface, locking the grains into place. Moisture content at optimal cohesion, she murmured, more to the sand than to herself. The structure rose behind her like a defiant thought made solid. It wasn't whimsical. It wasn't pretty. It was inevitable. A brutalist library carved from compacted earth, all sharp lines and unapologetic geometry. Cantilevered sections hovered in quiet rebellion against gravity. Negative spaces cut through the mass like deliberate absences. It didn't ask to be admired. It demanded to be understood. A judge approached, shoes sinking slightly with each careful step. "Miss Vance," he said, peering at the structure with something bordering on reverence. "You've outdone yourself." Isla stood slowly, brushing her hands together once. "Efficient. Final. I refined the load distribution model," she replied. "Last year's design had a 3.7% inefficiency in lateral stress resistance." The judge blinked. Of course it did. Her gaze flicked back to the structure, scanning it the way a hawk scans open land. Not for beauty. For weakness. There was none. The columns held. The arches bore weight with silent discipline. Even the smallest detailing, the ridged textures, the recessed alcoves, served a structural purpose. Nothing existed without reason. A gust of wind swept across the beach, sharper this time. It carried laughter from somewhere down the shoreline. Bright. Uncontained. Irritating. Isla ignored it. Final inspection in 5 minutes, another judge called. 5 minutes. Enough time for variables. She circled the structure once more, steps measured. Her shadow stretched long across the sand, intersecting with the geometry she'd created, as if trying to claim authorship. A hairline shift caught her eye. There. West-facing support. Minimal. Almost theoretical. Her trowel moved before thought could intervene, smoothing, reinforcing, correcting. A whisper of pressure. A calculated adjustment. The kind of change no one else would notice. But she would. Because she always did. The tide edged closer, a slow inhale of the sea reclaiming its reach. The first thin fingers of water curled toward the perimeter markers, testing boundaries. Isla straightened. "Not yet," she said quietly. The ocean, as always, declined to negotiate. The announcement came just as the sun slipped lower, painting the sky in molten gold and quiet violence. "First place," the head judge called, voice carrying cleanly over the gathered crowd, and recipient of this year's Golden Shovel. A pause. Manufactured suspense. Isla found it unnecessary. Isla Vance. Applause broke like a wave, loud, predictable, already fading in her mind. She stepped forward, posture immaculate, expression composed into something that resembled satisfaction, but never quite reached it. The golden shovel, a polished, ceremonial thing that had never touched actual sand, was placed into her hands. Cold, weighty, symbolic. 3 consecutive wins, the judge added, smiling. An extraordinary achievement. Consistency is a byproduct of discipline, Isla replied. There were cameras now. Flashes. Questions forming in the air like static. How does it feel to dominate the field again? Do you ever worry about being challenged? Is there anyone on the circuit who could rival your precision? Isla's gaze drifted, just for a moment, past the crowd. Further down the beach, beyond the neat rows of competition entries, something else stood. Or rather, it had stood. A massive, hollow form, curved like the spine of a creature surfacing from the earth. Openings carved into its body caught the wind, producing a low, haunting hum that carried even from this distance. And then, a section gave way. The structure sighed into itself, collapsing in slow, almost graceful surrender. Sand folding inward, lines dissolving, intention unraveling. A small crowd gasped. Someone laughed. The sound from earlier. Isla's eyes narrowed. A woman stood beside the ruin, hands on her hips, watching the collapse like it was the final act of a performance she'd already memorized. No panic. No frustration. Just delight. As the last of the structure settled into an unremarkable heap, the woman brushed sand from her arms and turned away, already done with it. No attempt to fix it. No attempt to save it. Isla felt something unfamiliar flicker at the edge of her thoughts. Not disapproval. Something sharper. Miss Vance, a reporter prompted. Your thoughts on the future of sand engineering? Isla tore her gaze away from the distant figure. The future, she said, voice cool and precise, belongs to those who understand that even impermanence can be engineered. Behind her, the tide finally reached the outer markers. And kept coming. Chapter 2, The Sandwich. The whale had lungs. That was Phoebe's favorite part. Not in any anatomical sense, no bones, no muscle, no obedient structure, but in the way the wind moved through it. The way it sang. Low at first. A hollow, wandering note that slipped through the carved chambers and spiraled out into the open air. Then higher, sharper as the breeze shifted direction, catching on the thin ridges she'd shaped with her hands and whatever tools happened to be within reach. A cathedral built for something that didn't believe in staying. Phoebe stood barefoot at its base, arms folded loosely, head tilted as she listened. The sound changed with every second, every breath of the coast reshaping the voice of the thing. Come on, she murmured to it. Give them something haunting. The wind obliged. A long, aching tone poured through the structure, turning heads all along the shoreline. Conversations paused. Judges glanced up from their clipboards, momentarily distracted from neat columns and right angles. Phoebe grinned. There it was. That moment. The flicker of something felt instead of measured. Worth it. Always worth it. A child wandered too close to one of the openings, peering inside. Is it alive? Phoebe crouched beside her, brushing a stray curl from the girl's forehead with sandy fingers. Only if you listen properly. The girl leaned closer. The whale exhaled another note, softer this time, like a secret slipping out sideways. The child gasped, delighted. Phoebe laughed under her breath and straightened, stepping back to take in the full shape of it. It wasn't symmetrical. Not even close. The curve of the spine dipped too sharply in one place, rose too dramatically in another. Openings of different sizes dotted its surface, some deliberate, some negotiated. The tail flared outward like it had forgotten what it was supposed to be halfway through becoming. Perfect. A judge approached, slower this time. Less certain. Miss Rossi, he said carefully, as though the structure might take offense. Can you explain the structural concept here? Phoebe tilted her head, considering the question like it was a riddle she hadn't decided to answer yet. It's a whale, she said. Yes, but it sings. The judge blinked. I gathered that. But in terms of it doesn't want to last, she added, almost gently. The judge frowned, pen hovering uncertainly above paper. Then what exactly are we evaluating? Phoebe's gaze drifted past him, out toward the horizon where the ocean stretched wide and indifferent. The moment before it doesn't, she said. Another gust of wind cut through the structure, pulling a strange, layered harmony from its hollow core. A sound that didn't belong to anything permanent. The judge wrote something down. It did not look promising. Phoebe rocked back on her heels, satisfied. The first crack was almost polite. A faint shift along the upper curve, a soft settling that only someone paying attention would notice. Phoebe noticed. She didn't move. The second was louder. A dry, whispering fracture that traveled down the spine like a thought deciding to become action. A few spectators stepped back. Should we? Someone started. Phoebe raised a hand, not to stop it, but to acknowledge it. It's okay, she said, smiling. It knows what it's doing. The wind picked up again, threading itself through weakened arches and thinning walls. The song faltered, dipped, then stretched into something almost mournful. And then, the whale exhaled for the last time. The top section folded inward, slow enough to watch, fast enough to feel inevitable. Sand slipped, cascaded, surrendered. The tail followed, collapsing in a soft rush that erased hours of work in seconds. A collective sound moved through the onlookers. Disappointment. Awe. Confusion. Phoebe clapped once. Light. Appreciative. Well done, she told the pile. A man nearby stared at her. You're not even going to try fix it? She arched a brow. Why? It just collapsed. Yes, she said. That was always the ending. He looked at her like she'd admitted to something criminal. Phoebe brushed sand from her thighs, turning away before anyone could ask another question. The performance was over. The rest was just debris. Behind her, the tide crept closer, already smoothing the edges of what had been. The fish and chip shop smelled like oil, vinegar, and decisions that didn't require overthinking. Phoebe approved. She sat at a weathered wooden table near the open window, one foot hooked around the leg of the chair, hair still tangled with salt and wind. A paper parcel rested in front of her, already losing its structural integrity under the weight of grease. Tragic, she muttered, peeling it open. No internal support system whatsoever. The first bite was perfect. Crisp. Hot. Immediate. She hummed softly, licking salt from her thumb as the last light of the day spilled across the table. Outside, the ocean continued its slow, inevitable work, erasing footprints, smoothing surfaces, reminding everyone that permanence was a negotiation no one actually won. Her phone buzzed. Phoebe glanced at it, chewing thoughtfully before picking it up. A message from an unknown number. You had the judge's attention. She snorted lightly. That's one way of saying it. Another message followed before she could set the phone down. You also lost. Phoebe leaned back in her chair, considering that. Did I? She murmured. Her gaze drifted out the window, toward the darkening line of the sea. For a moment, she could still hear it. The whale's song. Lingering somewhere between memory and imagination. She smiled, slow and certain. Then typed back. Only if you think that was the point. She hit send, dropped the phone onto the table, and reached for another chip. Outside, the tide finished what it started. Inside, Phoebe Rossi, artist, instigator, professional destroyer of expectations, ate her dinner like a woman with absolutely nothing to prove. And somewhere, just beyond the comfortable edge of her awareness, something had already begun shifting. Not collapsing. Not yet. But close. Chapter 3. The Ultimatum. Glass didn't forgive mistakes. Isla Vance liked that about it. The boardroom stretched wide and immaculate, all clean lines and quiet intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows frame the coastline like a painting, controlled, distant, contained. The ocean looked smaller from up here. Manageable. On the contrary, he said. We are asking you to evolve it. Isla held his gaze. Unblinking. Unmoved. But something beneath the surface shifted. Not enough to see. Enough to feel. Why her? She asked finally. The answer came without hesitation. Because she is everything you are not. The words settled into the room like a challenge thrown at her feet. Isla let out a slow breath through her nose, turning back to the window. The ocean again. Relentless. Unstructured. Alive. Impossible to control. Behind her, the screen still glowed with Phoebe's image. That laugh. That careless, infuriating ease. Isla imagined it collapsing. Of course it would. Everything like that did. Fine, she said. The word tasted unfamiliar. I will compete. A pause. But understand this, she added, turning back, eyes sharp enough to cut glass. I am not interested in expression. Aurelian's representative smiled again, this time with something almost like anticipation. That, he said, is exactly why you need her. Across town, Phoebe Rossi was sitting cross-legged on a sun-warmed floor, sketching something that looked suspiciously like a staircase melting into the sea. Her phone buzzed again. She ignored it. It buzzed a third time. Persistent, she muttered, finally picking it up. An email this time. Subject line. Aurelian Coastal Developments. Official invitation. Phoebe raised a brow, opening it with mild curiosity. She read the first line. Then the second. Then. She laughed. Loud. Bright. Completely unrestrained. No way. She read it again, just to be sure the universe hadn't finally lost its mind. Duo Masters Division. Mandatory partner. Isla Vance. Phoebe flopped back onto the floor, staring up at the ceiling like it might offer commentary. The Ice Queen, she said to no one. You're pairing me with the human blueprint? Her laughter softened into something more thoughtful. More dangerous. Oh, this is going to be fun. She rolled onto her side, propping herself up on one elbow as her gaze drifted to her unfinished sketch. Lines that didn't behave. Shapes that refused to settle. A structure that looked like it might fall apart if you breathed too close to it. Phoebe smiled slowly. Let's see if she can breathe, she murmured. Outside, the wind picked up. And somewhere far too close for comfort, the tide began to turn. Chapter 4. The Forced Proximity. The house was offensively perfect. Whitewashed walls. Clean glass. A deck that spilled toward the sea like it had something to prove. Even the air felt curated, salted just enough, softened by distance, like the ocean had been asked politely not to misbehave. Isla Vance stood at the threshold, suitcase beside her, keys cool in her palm. She didn't move. She assessed. 2 floors. Open plan. Minimal structural interruptions. The kind of place designed to feel effortless while hiding the engineering required to keep it standing against coastal weather. Acceptable. She stepped inside. Her footsteps echoed once, twice, before settling into the quiet. The space was empty in a way that suggested temporary occupation, furnished, but not lived in. Surfaces waiting to be used. Air waiting to be disturbed. Good. Order could be maintained here. Isla set her suitcase down with deliberate precision and immediately began unpacking, not clothes, not yet, but equipment. A laser level. Moisture meters. Calipers. Tools laid out across the kitchen counter in clean, exact lines, each piece placed with intention. Control established. A low hum of an engine cut through the quiet. Isla paused. Outside. Approaching. She glanced at her watch. Early. Of course. Chaos rarely respected schedules. The hum grew louder, then cut abruptly. A door slammed. Footsteps, light, unhurried, crunched over gravel. Isla didn't go to the window. She didn't need to. The front door burst open without ceremony. "Please tell me this place has decent water pressure," a voice announced, bright and entirely uninvited. "If I have to rinse salt out of my hair with a polite drizzle, I'm leaving." Phoebe Rossi walked in like she owned gravity. Sandals. Of course. A surfboard tucked casually under one arm, as if it were a handbag. A canvas bag hung from her shoulder, something glittering faintly inside it every time it shifted. Sand clung to her skin like it had chosen her. She stopped when she saw Isla. Blink. A slow grin spread across her face. "Well," Phoebe said, dragging the word out like she was tasting it. "You're real." Isla didn't smile. "You're late," she replied. Phoebe glanced at an imaginary watch on her wrist. "Am I? Or are you aggressively early?" "I operate on agreed timelines." "I operate on better ones." Silence. It stretched, thin and electric. Phoebe dropped her bag onto the nearest chair. Glitter spilled slightly from the opening, catching the light like a bad decision already made, and leaned the surfboard against the wall with all the care of someone who trusted objects to survive her. Her gaze swept the room, landed on the counter, paused. "Oh," she said, walking closer. "You brought toys." Isla followed her movement, something tightening in her chest. "They're tools." Phoebe picked up the moisture meter, turning it over in her hands. "This tells you if the sand is emotionally ready. It measures water content." "Same thing." Phoebe set it down, slightly off from where it had been. Isla noticed immediately. Of course she did. She stepped forward, adjusting it back into alignment without comment. Phoebe watched the movement, interest sharpening. "You're going to hate me," she said lightly. "I already do." And then Phoebe tilted her head. "Feels premature. We haven't even built anything together yet." "We won't," Isla said. "You will follow my direction, and we might salvage a competitive structure." Phoebe let out a soft, delighted laugh. "You think this is a dictatorship? I think this is a competition. And you think those are different?" Their eyes locked. There it was. Not tension. Not yet. Something more precise. More dangerous. Recognition. Phoebe stepped closer, close enough now that Isla could see the fine grains of sand still caught along her collarbone. Could smell salt and something warmer beneath it. "Tell me something, Isla," Phoebe said, voice dipping just slightly. "Do you always talk like a user manual? Or is this a special occasion?" Isla didn't step back. She didn't step forward either. "I speak efficiently," she replied. "Efficiently," Phoebe echoed. "Right. No wasted words. No unnecessary feeling. Feeling does not reinforce structures." Phoebe's smile softened, just a fraction. Not mocking this time. Curious. "Depends what you're building." The moment stretched, then snapped. Isla turned away first, moving toward the counter with purpose. She picked up her tablet, pulling up a clean, precise diagram. "Our first practice session is at 0600, she said. "We will begin with foundational load distribution." "Absolutely not." Isla stilled. Slowly turned back. Phoebe had already kicked off what little she was wearing on her feet, something that had barely qualified as footwear, and was walking toward the open glass doors leading to the deck. "Sunrise is for surfing," she said, glancing over her shoulder. "The sand's better after. Looser. Less uptight." "The sand is not a personality?" Phoebe finished, stepping out onto the deck. Agree to disagree. The ocean stretched out before them, endless and uncontained. The late afternoon light caught the water, turning it into something molten and alive. Phoebe inhaled deeply, arms stretching above her head like she was greeting something familiar. Isla watched her. Watched the way she moved like the world wasn't something to manage, but something to meet. Irritating. Reckless. Unstable. And yet, Isla stepped onto the deck, the wood warm beneath her feet. "The competition begins in 3 days," she said. We do not have the luxury of improvisation. Phoebe leaned against the railing, looking out at the horizon. Everything is improvisation, she said. You just call it something else when it works. Isla exhaled slowly. Measured. You will adhere to a structured schedule, she said. We will not waste time on fun, Phoebe offered. Frivolity. Phoebe turned, resting her elbows on the railing, studying Isla like she was a puzzle that refused to admit it had missing pieces. Okay, she said finally. Let's make a deal. Isla didn't like the sound of that. We try it your way, Phoebe continued, ticking it off on her fingers. Early mornings. Strict plans. No talking while working, I assume. Correct. And when that inevitably fails, Phoebe added, smile creeping back, we try it my way. Isla crossed her arms. And what exactly is your way? Phoebe pushed off the railing, stepping closer again. Not quite invading space. Not quite not. You'll see. A beat. Then softer. If you're brave enough. Isla held her gaze. Something flickered again. That same sharp, unfamiliar edge from before. Not disapproval. Not quite. 0600, Isla said. Phoebe groaned dramatically, tipping her head back toward the sky. You're cruel. Disciplined. Tragic, Phoebe corrected. She grabbed her bag on the way back inside, glitter threatening to escape with every step. Fine, she added. But if I fall asleep on your load-bearing grains, I'm blaming you. They're not. I know, Phoebe called over her shoulder, disappearing down the hallway. Emotionally ready. A door shut. Silence returned. But it felt different now. Occupied. Unstable. Isla stood on the deck a moment longer, eyes drifting back to the ocean. The tide was coming in. Of course it was. Behind her, inside the pristine, controlled space she'd already begun to organize, something had shifted just enough to be noticed. Not broken. Not yet. But no longer entirely under her control. And for the first time in a long while, Isla Vance wasn't sure if that was a flaw in the design. Or the beginning of something else. Chapter 5, Rules of Engagement. At 5:58, the world was still undecided. The sky hovered between ink and gold, the horizon just beginning to bleed light into the sea. The beach stretched wide and quiet, untouched except for the steady breath of the tide drawing its lines in and out, in and out. Isla Vance was already working. Of course she was. A clean grid had been marked into the sand, precise, measured, inevitable. Stakes at each corner. String lines pulled taut, defining boundaries the ocean had not been consulted on. Her tools were laid out in exact formation. Her posture? Controlled. Efficient. Uncompromising. She crouched, running her fingers through a section of damp sand, testing texture, cohesion, response. A slight adjustment of water from the spray bottle. A careful compression. Perfect. Behind her, footsteps approached. Late. Isla didn't turn. You're 2 minutes behind schedule, she said, voice carrying just enough to reach. A pause. Then, you're emotionally 2 decades behind schedule, but I wasn't going to say anything. Phoebe Rossi dropped onto the sand beside the grid like gravity had invited her personally. Hair still damp from the ocean. Of course. A faint sheen of salt on her skin catching the early light. She stretched her legs out in front of her, digging her heels into the sand as if testing its mood. Isla closed her eyes for a fraction of a second. Centered herself. We are not here to exchange commentary, she said. We are here to work. Phoebe hummed, unconvinced. Those 2 things feel deeply connected. They are not. They are for me. Isla stood, brushing sand from her hands with controlled precision. Rule 1, she said, turning to face her fully. No talking while working. Phoebe blinked. Once. Twice. Then she smiled slowly, like she'd just been handed something wrapped in temptation. Oh, that's not going to last. It will. Isla, Phoebe said gently, almost kindly, I break rules for cardio. This is not. What's your favorite cloud? The question landed midair like a bird that had no intention of following flight patterns. Isla stared at her, unblinking. We are not discussing clouds. Cumulus are friendly, Phoebe continued, entirely undeterred. Stratus feel like commitment issues. Cirrus are just showing off. Silence. Phoebe leaned back on her hands, watching Isla like this was the most interesting experiment she'd run all week. Well, she prompted. Isla exhaled slowly. Measured. Controlled. No talking, she repeated. Phoebe considered that. Then leaned forward, closer now, eyes bright with something dangerously close to delight. So you don't have one? Isla turned away. That was answer enough. The first structure was supposed to be simple. A foundational tower. Nothing ambitious. Just a test of rhythm, coordination, shared process. It lasted 11 minutes. Stop, Isla snapped, stepping back from the structure with a sharp motion. You're compromising the load distribution. Phoebe, who was currently carving something that looked suspiciously decorative into one side, glanced up. I'm improving it. You're destabilizing it. I'm giving it personality. It does not need. The tower shifted. Just slightly. But enough. Both of them saw it. Phoebe tilted her head. Okay, that's new. Step back, Isla said immediately, already reaching for her spray bottle, her trowel, controls slipping into motion before thought could interfere. Phoebe didn't move. Instead, she leaned in closer. Wait. Phoebe? Wait, she repeated, softer now, something sharper beneath the playfulness. Isla froze. That was new. Phoebe studied the structure, eyes tracing the lines, the subtle sag along one side, the way the sand held tension like a breath it wasn't sure it could keep. Then, carefully, unexpectedly careful, she pressed her palm lightly against the opposite side. Not to reinforce. To balance. Talk to me, Phoebe said, not looking at her. Where's the stress pulling? Isla hesitated. Just for a second. Then, west-facing base, she said. Moisture variance. It's uneven. Phoebe nodded slightly. Okay. She shifted her hand. Adjusted pressure. Not enough to crush, just enough to counter. Now, Isla stepped closer, eyes scanning, recalculating. It's holding, she admitted. Phoebe glanced up, a flicker of triumph in her expression. Look at that. Teamwork. This is not. The tower gave a soft, traitorous sigh. And collapsed. Not dramatically. Not violently. Just inevitability arriving early. Sand folded into itself, lines dissolving, effort returning to nothing in a quiet rush. They both stared at it. Silence. Then, Phoebe snorted. It slipped out before she could stop it. A small, sharp sound that cracked the tension clean open. Isla turned slowly. You find that amusing? A little, Phoebe admitted, biting back a grin that absolutely refused to behave. It had potential. It was structurally compromised from the moment you. It was structurally bored from the moment you started. That landed. Isla's jaw tightened. You are not taking this seriously. Phoebe stood, brushing sand from her legs, her expression shifting, not entirely losing its lightness, but grounding slightly. I am, she said. Just not in the way you want. Then explain it to me, Isla shot back. Because from where I'm standing, you are treating this like a performance. Phoebe met her gaze. Direct. Unflinching. Everything is a performance, she said quietly. Some of us just admit it. Isla scoffed. This is engineering. This is sand. A beat. Wind moved between them, carrying the scent of salt and something electric. You're afraid of it, Phoebe added, softer now. Isla stilled. I am not afraid of sand. Phoebe shook her head, stepping closer again. Not the sand, she said. The part where it doesn't listen to you. That hit deeper. closer to something Isla did not allow strangers to touch. Her voice, when it came, was sharper than intended. I don't build things that fail. Phoebe's expression shifted. Not mocking. Not teasing. Understanding. That's not true, she said gently. Isla's eyes flashed. Excuse me. Phoebe gestured to the ocean, the tide already inching forward, patient and inevitable. Everything fails, she said. You just choose smaller timelines. Silence stretched between them again. Different this time. Heavier. More honest. Phoebe stepped back first, breaking it before it could settle too deeply. Okay, she said, clapping her hands once, energy snapping back into place. Your turn. My what? You set a rule, Phoebe said, ticking it off on her fingers. No talking while working. We tried it. It failed. Spectacularly. It did not. It did, she cut in, grinning. Now we try my way. Isla crossed her arms, which is. Phoebe bent down, scooping up a handful of sand, letting it slip slowly through her fingers. We listen, she said. To sand. To each other. Isla stared at her. You're serious. Terrifying, I know. A pause. The tide crept closer. The sun edged higher. Time moved. Finally. Isla exhaled. Fine. 10 minutes, she said. We try it your way for 10 minutes. Phoebe's grin lit up like sunrise hitting glass. Dangerous, she murmured. I like it. They moved back toward the grid. Closer this time. Not quite aligned. Not yet. But no longer entirely at odds. Phoebe crouched beside her, their shoulders almost brushing as they reached for the same section of sand. Neither pulled away. Hey, Isla. Phoebe said softly. A beat. Isla didn't look at her. What? Phoebe smiled, eyes on the sand. Cirrus, she said. You feel like Cirrus. Isla paused. Just for a second. Then continued working. But something small, quiet, unexpected. Shifted. And this time. It didn't collapse. Chapter 6. The First Practice. By the time the sun climbed high enough to burn intention into the sand, their second attempt was already failing. Not collapsing. Worse. Leaning. Isla stood with her hands on her hips, staring at the structure like it had personally betrayed her lineage. This is unacceptable. Phoebe, crouched low near the base, squinted up at the tilt with a kind of thoughtful curiosity usually reserved for abstract art. It's expressive. It's unstable. Same thing, depending on your outlook. Isla inhaled slowly through her nose, the kind of breath that had prevented entire meetings from imploding. This was meant to be a basic vertical form. And it is, Phoebe said, gesturing loosely. Just. Emotionally conflicted. It is defying gravity. Phoebe tilted her head. Aren't we all? Isla turned away before she said something professionally regrettable. They had started again after sunrise. New grid. New measurements. New rules, unspoken this time, negotiated somewhere in the quiet space between irritation and curiosity. Isla led. Phoebe didn't follow. Not exactly. She moved alongside. Around. Occasionally through. Like water finding its own path. Stop, Isla said suddenly. Phoebe froze mid-motion, fingers still pressed lightly into the sand. What now? You're applying uneven pressure again. Phoebe glanced down. I'm barely touching it. That's the problem. Phoebe huffed a quiet laugh. You want me to manhandle it? I want you to respect structural integrity. Phoebe looked up at her, eyes narrowing just slightly. I do, she said. I just don't worship it. There it was again. That edge. Not quite conflict. Not quite understanding. Something sharpening between them. They tried again. And again. Each time, the result was, almost. A tower that stood for 30 seconds too long before giving up. A wall that held beautifully on one side and betrayed them on the other. A curve that Phoebe insisted on introducing that Isla refused to acknowledge until it started working. That was the worst part. It sometimes worked. Don't, Isla started. Too late. Phoebe had already carved a subtle indentation along the side of the structure. Not deep. Not dramatic. Just enough. Phoebe. Relax. I am not. The structure settled. Not down. Not out. Into itself. Balanced. Isla stopped. Actually stopped. Her eyes scanned the line Phoebe had just altered, recalculating faster than she could speak. That shouldn't. But it does, Phoebe said softly. For once, there was no teasing in it. Just fact. Isla stepped closer, crouching beside her. Their shoulders brushed this time. Neither moved. She reached out, fingers hovering just above the altered section before finally pressing lightly against it. Testing. The structure held. Better than before. Explain, Isla said. Phoebe smiled, small and almost private. Pressure needs somewhere to go, she said. You trap it, it fights back. Isla frowned. That's not how. It is, Phoebe cut in gently. You just call it something else in your world. Isla opened her mouth. Closed it. Because, annoyingly, Phoebe wasn't wrong. By midday, the beach had lost its quiet. Other teams practiced along the shoreline, voices rising and falling with varying degrees of confidence and desperation. Structures of all shapes dotted the sand, some elegant, some ambitious, some already surrendering to gravity. And then there was theirs. Still standing. Barely. Phoebe leaned back onto her hands, studying it with narrowed eyes. It looks like it's judging me. It should, Isla replied. You're responsible for that side. Phoebe grinned. So you admit it's holding? For now. I'll take it. A beat. Wind shifted. The structure shivered. They both saw it. Simultaneously. Phoebe sat up straighter. Don't touch it. It needs reinforcement. It needs space. It needs. The tower leaned. Further this time. Phoebe reached out instinctively, her hand landing over Isla's as both of them moved at once. Contact. Warm. Unexpected. Still. The world didn't stop. But something slowed. Isla's breath caught, just slightly, just enough to be noticeable to someone paying attention. Phoebe noticed everything. Don't, Phoebe said again, quieter now. But she didn't remove her hand. Neither did Isla. Together, they adjusted. Not pushing. Not pulling. Balancing. For one suspended, impossible second. It worked. Perfectly. The structure stood. Straightened. Held. They both looked up at it. Then at each other. Too close. Far too close. Phoebe's voice dropped, barely above the wind. See? Isla didn't answer. Because she didn't trust what might come out. The tower collapsed anyway. Of course it did. Not dramatically. Not even immediately. Just, gradually. A slow surrender as the internal balance they'd found slipped through their fingers. Sand gave way. Lines dissolved. Effort returned to nothing. Phoebe exhaled, long and low. There it is. Isla pulled her hand back first this time. Stepping away. Reclaiming distance like it mattered. It was flawed, she said. It was alive, Phoebe countered. It failed. Phoebe stood, brushing sand from her hands, her gaze lingering on the ruined structure. It tried, she said. Isla turned to her, something sharper in her expression now. We are not here to try. Phoebe met her head-on. Yes, we are. Silence. Heavy. Charged. The tide edged closer. Always closer. Finally, Phoebe sighed, the fight draining out of her shoulders just enough to soften the moment. Look, she said, quieter now. We're not going to get this right by pretending we're the same. I'm not pretending anything. Good, Phoebe said. Because I'm not going to become you. I didn't ask you to. You implied it. Isla's joy tightened. I expect confidence. Phoebe stepped closer. Not playful this time. Not teasing. Clear. I am confident, she said. Just not in your language. That landed. Clean. True. Isla held her gaze. Then slowly exhaled. Then teach me, she said. Phoebe blinked, caught off guard. You want me to teach you? Your approach, Isla clarified. The adjustments. Phoebe studied her for a long moment, something unreadable flickering behind her eyes. Then, a slow smile. Careful, she said softly. That sounds like trust. It's not, Isla replied immediately. Phoebe's smile widened. Not yet. The wind picked up, carrying laughter from somewhere down the beach. The world continued. Other teams built and failed and tried again. But here, something had shifted. Not stable, not defined, but no longer collapsing on contact. Phoebe crouched again, gesturing to the sand between them. All right, she said. Lesson 1. Isla followed, lowering herself beside her without hesitation this time. Sand listens, Phoebe continued. It doesn't have ears, I know, Phoebe cut in, rolling her eyes. Just pay attention. Isla did. For once. Not measuring. Not calculating. Just watching. The tide moved. The wind shifted. Phoebe's fingers traced a line that didn't make immediate sense. Isla didn't stop her. Didn't correct her. Didn't control it. And for the first time since this began, they weren't fighting the same thing from opposite sides. They were standing in the same place, even if neither of them was quite ready to admit it. Yet, Chapter 7. The Resistance. By late afternoon, the beach had turned restless. Wind sharpened. Voices carried further. Even the sand felt different beneath their hands, drier on the surface, stubborn underneath, like it had decided cooperation was optional. Their structure, if it could still be called that, stood in a state of tense disagreement. Half precision. Half rebellion. Entirely unstable. Isla circled it slowly, arms crossed, eyes scanning every angle like she could will it into obedience. This is inefficient. Phoebe, sprawled on her stomach nearby, chin propped on her hands, didn't even look up. It's evolving. It's leaning. It's expressing. It's failing. Phoebe sighed, rolling onto her back to stare at the sky. You say that like it's the worst thing a thing can do. It is, Isla replied instantly. Phoebe turned her head, studying her now. Is it? Isla didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her silence had edges. They had been at it for hours. Trying. Adjusting. Rebuilding. Circling the same invisible argument without naming it. Until now. Phoebe pushed herself up, brushing sand from her arms as she stood. Okay, she said, voice lighter than the tension deserved. Let's take a break before you declare war on a pile of grains. I am not declaring. You're glaring at it like it owes you money. It owes me stability. Phoebe let out a short laugh. You can't demand that from sand, Isla. Or anything, really. I can design for it. Design all you want, Phoebe shot back, stepping closer. It still does what it wants in the end. Isla's gaze snapped to hers. No, she said, sharper now. It does what it's built to do. And what if it's built to fall? Then it's built incorrectly. Phoebe's expression shifted. Not playful anymore. Not soft. Something else. Or maybe, she said slowly, it's built honestly. That hit harder than it should have. Isla's jaw tightened. You're not taking this seriously, she said. There it was. The line drawn. Phoebe stilled. Excuse me. You treat everything like it doesn't matter, Isla continued, the words coming faster now, cleaner, colder. Like the outcome is irrelevant as long as you enjoy the process. Phoebe's eyes darkened, something quiet and dangerous settling in. That's not what I'm doing. Then what are you doing? Isla demanded. Because from where I'm standing, you're playing. Phoebe took a step forward. Close enough now that the air between them felt tight. I'm building, she said. Just not for a trophy. We're here to win. No, Phoebe said, sharper now. You're here to win. Isla blinked, thrown off just enough to matter. And you're not. Phoebe let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh, but there was no humor in it. I'm here because it's the only place people can't pretend things last forever. Silence. It dropped heavy between them. Isla frowned. That doesn't make any sense. It does to me. That's the problem. Phoebe's lips pressed together, something flickering behind her eyes, something Isla hadn't seen before. Not chaos. Not confidence. Something closer to restraint. You think I don't understand structure? Phoebe said quietly. Isla hesitated. That was enough. Phoebe nodded once, like she'd expected it. Figures. She turned away, pacing a few steps before stopping, hands braced on her hips. I studied architecture for 2 years, she said, not looking at Isla. Top of my class. Isla blinked again. That she hadn't expected. Then why? Why don't I build like you? Phoebe cut in, turning back, something sharper now in her voice. Because I've seen what happens when everything is about perfection. Isla crossed her arms, and what happens? Phoebe laughed, but it came out brittle this time. It becomes about fear. That landed. Too close. Isla's expression hardened. Precision is not fear. No, Phoebe agreed. But control is. A beat. Wind cut between them, carrying the sharp scent of salt and something brewing just beneath the surface. You're afraid of anything you can't calculate, Phoebe continued. Anything that might not hold, might not last, might not behave the way you planned. And you're not. Isla snapped. Phoebe stilled. That question hit. Different. Quieter. Of course I am, she said, softer now. I just don't hide it behind blueprints. Something in Isla's chest tightened. Uncomfortable. Unfamiliar. I don't hide, she said. Phoebe met her gaze. Direct. Unflinching. Then why does everything you build look like it's bracing for impact? The words landed like a crack through glass. Clean. Sharp. Impossible to ignore. Isla's breath caught, just for a second, just enough to betray something she didn't fully understand. Phoebe saw it. Of course she did. And for a moment, she looked like she might take it back. She didn't. Say it, Phoebe added quietly. Tell me I'm wrong. Isla opened her mouth. Closed it. Because she couldn't. Not entirely. The silence stretched. Too long. Too honest. Phoebe exhaled slowly, the fight draining out of her shoulders. Yeah, she said. Thought so. She turned away, heading toward the waterline, her footsteps softer now, less certain. I'm not the problem here, Isla, she called back, not looking over her shoulder. You just don't know how to build something that isn't guaranteed to survive. Isla stood there. Still. Rigid. Watching her go. The structure behind her shifted slightly, a quiet reminder of everything they hadn't managed to fix. The tide crept closer. Always closer. Phoebe stopped at the edge of the water, letting the waves lap at her feet. She stared out at the horizon, arms loose at her sides, shoulders rising and falling with a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Behind her, silence lingered. Then, footsteps. Measured. Familiar. Isla stopped a few feet away. Not too close. Not too far. I don't build things that fail, she said. The words sounded different now. Less like a declaration. More like a defense. Phoebe didn't turn. I know, she said. A beat. Then, quieter. That's not the same as building something that lives. The ocean moved between them, endless and indifferent. For once. Neither of them had a solution. And the sand, as always, waited. Unimpressed. Unmoved. Ready to fall. Or hold. Depending on what they chose next. Chapter 8. The Spark. The floodlights cast long, liquid shadows across the sand. The tide was already creeping in, slow and relentless, whispering warnings at the edges of their makeshift arena. Isla crouched beside the skeletal beginnings of a flying buttress, her trowel poised like a scalpel. Precision in her every movement. The air smelled of salt, sweat, and sand, her sensory world reduced to textures she could command. "It's a flying buttress, Phoebe, not a suggestion," Isla hissed, her voice low and sharp. "If the moisture content drops by even 2%, the whole West Wing is going to pancake onto the judges." Phoebe didn't look up. She was etching tiny, impossible ivy leaves into the base with a toothpick, her hand dancing with a freedom that made Isla's teeth grind. "Maybe the West Wing wants to pancake, Isla. Maybe it's tired of carrying the weight of your ego." Isla paused mid-motion. A strand of hair had escaped her ponytail, whipping across her cheek. She brushed it aside without thinking. Her chest felt tight in a way that had nothing to do with exertion. "My ego is the only thing keeping us from third place." "Funny," Phoebe murmured, leaning in slightly, blowing a stray grain of sand from Isla's cheek. Her thumb lingered just a moment too long. "I thought it was the chemistry." Isla's trowel faltered. Her eyes met Phoebe's, so close now, impossible to ignore. There was a warmth there she couldn't calculate, a wild, human variable. "You're reckless," she said, voice quieter than she intended. Phoebe shrugged, still smiling, a glimmer of mischief mixed with something softer. "And you're terrifyingly precise." The sand between them felt suddenly inconsequential. The cold, mathematical world Isla usually inhabited was dissolving under the heat radiating from Phoebe, under the unpredictability of her own racing pulse. "Stay focused," Isla muttered, but she didn't move away. Her fingers brushed Phoebe's as they reached for the same section of sand, adjusting it in unison. The touch was electric. Phoebe's grin softened into something unguarded. "See? We're better together." "Better together doesn't mean," Isla started. Her words died in her throat. She realized she wasn't sure what she wanted better together to mean. The tide whispered closer. The night held its breath. Phoebe leaned even closer, just enough that Isla could feel the warmth of her breath, the faint salt of her skin. "I like it when you stop trying to control everything," she said softly. Isla shook her head, trying to regain footing in a world that suddenly felt slippery. "I can't let." Phoebe laughed, low and teasing, brushing a strand of sand off Isla's arm. "Relax, engineer. Some things are meant to fall. And some are meant to spark." Her words hung between them, heavier than the tide, hotter than the floodlights. Isla's heart hammered against her ribs, a rhythm that had nothing to do with the sand. She had built towers that could withstand storms, walls that mocked gravity, but nothing had ever felt like this. Phoebe tilted her head, studying her with a smirk that was half challenge, half invitation. "You feel it too, don't you?" Isla swallowed. She couldn't lie, not now. Not with the pulse of the night, the scent of salt, and the thrill of chaos brushing her skin. "Yes," she admitted. Phoebe's grin widened. "Good. That's the spark." A spark. Small, fleeting, dangerous. But enough to ignite a storm neither of them would be able to contain. The night stretched, the ocean whispered, and for the first time, Isla allowed herself to imagine that maybe not everything needed to be controlled. Some things, like Phoebe Rossi, were meant to be wild. And maybe that was exactly what the West Wing needed. Chapter 9. The Sabotage. The morning smelled of salt, oil, and faint panic. Isla's sharp eyes picked it out first. Footprints that didn't belong. Sleek, deliberate, too perfectly spaced to be random. Phoebe leaned over the edge of their partially completed, ethereal city, spraying a gentle mist over the walls to maintain cohesion. "You see it too, right? That weirdness." Isla didn't look up. Her trowel moved with precision, brushing a faint line along the base. "That's not weird. That's called preparation." Phoebe straightened. "No, those are human-sized prints. On our grid, leading straight to the beach." Isla finally turned, squinting toward the line of disturbed sand. Her stomach knotted. She had seen enough prepared competition sabotage to know the signs. smoothed over edges where someone tried to erase themselves, subtle depressions in the sand that weren't caused by tools. Her eyes met Phoebe's. "Brothers of basalt," she said, low. Phoebe raised an eyebrow. "Oh, the villainous duo who look like they moonlight as action figures? Yeah, I know them. They're here." Isla's voice was tight. "And they don't play fair." By the time the first drone whirred into view, sleek, black, with a tiny camera attached, the sand between them felt like glass, fragile and sharp. Phoebe's grin appeared, just a fraction of insanity glinting in her eyes. "And here I thought we'd get a quiet morning." Isla snapped her trowel up. "Quiet? Nothing about this is quiet." The drone circled once, twice, then dove low, kicking up sand in a precise, aggressive arc toward the base of their tower. Instinctively, Isla lunged forward, spraying a fine mist to dampen the sand, counteracting the drone's minor destruction. Phoebe dove beside her, arms sweeping across the surface, rebuilding and reinforcing the edges in tandem. Their movements were urgent, synchronized not because they had planned it, but because survival demanded it. "Reinforce the northwest quadrant," Isla barked. Phoebe obeyed, her fingers dancing across the sand, applying pressure exactly where Isla hadn't told her to. And it worked. A beat later, the drone swooped again. This time, Phoebe was ready. She grabbed a small handheld net, slapping it upward, deflecting the device just as it buzzed dangerously close. Isla froze, blinking. "Did you just?" Phoebe smirked. "Improvise." Isla's jaw tightened. Then, she smirked back. "Fine. Improvise with precision." Together, they rebuilt, reinforced, adjusted, moving in a rhythm neither of them could have predicted the night before. It was chaos with structure. Disaster with artistry. The brothers of basalt didn't stop. They were determined, sneaky, and spectacularly smug. But Isla and Phoebe, shoulder to shoulder, hands coated in wet sand, kept up, turning every attack into a new opportunity. Phoebe leaned closer as she patched a subtle crack. "You know," she whispered, "this is way more fun than fighting alone." Isla's fingers froze for just a heartbeat. Then she moved again. "Don't say that," she muttered, but her voice betrayed nothing of her rapid heartbeat. Phoebe grinned. "Oh, I did." A final sweep from the drone sent a small spray of sand over their shoulders. They both ducked instinctively, ending up pressed together, chests nearly touching, arms entangled in a strange, sweaty embrace of sand and adrenaline. For one suspended second, the world shrank to this. The rain of sand, the hum of the drone, the pulse of someone so reckless she couldn't exist in the same space. Then Isla snapped, tossing a spray bottle toward Phoebe. "Cover me." "Cover you." Phoebe laughed, ducking behind a half-finished wall. "I thought we were equal partners." "We are," Isla hissed, "but I'm better at dealing with drones." Phoebe rolled her eyes, but executed flawlessly. Together, they outmaneuvered the final attack, the drone retreating with mechanical whining into the sky. They collapsed into the sand afterward, laughing breathlessly, the adrenaline still vibrating in their bones. Phoebe leaned back, letting the tide lick her toes, sand stuck to her damp skin. "I could get used to this," she said, grin wide and mischievous. Isla, still on one knee, dusting sand from her hands, looked at her with something she didn't bother naming. "Don't get used to it." Phoebe tilted her head. "Oh, you already are." For the first time, the tower, messy, patched, leaning slightly at the edges, stood through everything. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't pristine. It was alive. Just like them. And now, nothing would ever be the same. Chapter 10. The Vulnerability. The beach was quiet, almost reverent, the aftermath of the sabotage leaving only the soft hiss of the tide and the occasional cry of a distant gull. Isla sat on the edge of their half-finished tower, knees pulled up, fingers tracing lines in the wet sand. Her precise world had been reduced to a patchwork of compromise, adrenaline, and salt water. She hated how her chest still thumped from it. Phoebe settled beside her, uncorking a bottle of wine like it was the solution to all problems. A single red stream trickled into 2 paper cups. The aroma was faintly sweet, earthy comfort in a bottle. "You have to admit," Phoebe said, tipping her cup, "we make a pretty good team under fire." Isla didn't look at her. "We survive," she said flatly. "Barely." Phoebe reached out, brushing a hand lightly across Isla's forearm. "That's called being human." For a long moment, they just sat there. Sand between fingers, salt on skin, the sound of the tide whispering like a lullaby. No words, just presence. Finally, Isla allowed herself the smallest tilt of her head toward Phoebe. "And you?" Phoebe shrugged, lips quirking into a faint smile. "I hide behind chaos. I make things fall before they have the chance to break me. But I'm terrified too. Terrified that if I try, it might not be enough." The confession hung in the air like a fragile sculpture. Isla's lips parted. "Then maybe," she said softly, almost reluctantly, "we're both terrified. But we're doing it anyway." Phoebe's smile widened. "A warm, dangerous, beautiful thing." "Exactly. And that's why I like this," she said, gesturing to the sand, the tower, the mess of their attempts. "Because it's alive. And so are we." Isla let herself lean slightly closer, her shoulder brushing Phoebe's. The contact was electric, grounding, terrifying. She felt it, the precarious balance of something new, something real, something that might fall if mishandled. Phoebe tilted her head, eyes catching the last light of dusk. "Don't worry," she murmured, softer than the waves. "I won't let it collapse." Isla didn't reply. She didn't need to. The words, the warmth, the shared fear, and the small, human spark between them said everything. And for the first time since this partnership began, Isla allowed herself to imagine that maybe letting someone in could be worth the risk. The tide crept higher, the sky deepened to navy, and the two of them, flawed, chaotic, precise, human, sat together in the quiet, letting the vulnerability stretch out between them like a fragile bridge over the sea. Chapter 11. The Gala. The ballroom smelled like polished wood, perfume, and champagne. Candles flickered in crystal sconces along the walls, catching on gilded mirrors that multiplied the elegance and the pressure. Isla straightened the back of her dress, a severe, midnight blue sheath that matched the precision of her personality. She had worn heels only for necessity before, but tonight they were mandatory. She hated them. Hated the way the floor tilting slightly made her feel human. Phoebe, on the other hand, had somehow managed to make a sleek black suit look like art. Her tie was slightly askew, a statement. Her hair fell wild across her shoulders, deliberately defying the ballroom's order. They stood together at the entrance, an odd pair, rigid and chaotic, structured and fluid, expected to present as a single unit. The gala organizers had been very clear, "You're a team now." Project Confidence. Isla squared her shoulders. "Project Confidence," she muttered. Phoebe smirked. "I prefer Radiate Chaos," she whispered, brushing a hand lightly against Isla's arm as they entered. They moved through the crowd, smiling where necessary, nodding where expected. Small talk dripped from the guests like champagne bubbles, careful, sparkling, slightly artificial. Phoebe leaned in at one point, voice low and teasing. "You realize you're supposed to act like you're having fun, right?" "I am having fun," Isla said immediately, which was not entirely a lie. The thrill of appearing composed while teetering in heels was intoxicating. Phoebe raised an eyebrow, lips curving. "Sure. Fun in a calculated, terrifyingly precise way." "Got it." They reached the center of the room, where other competitors mingled. Some whispered, some laughed, some glanced at them curiously, clearly noting the tension that had grown between the two like a visible current. "Let's make this simple," Phoebe murmured. "Smile." Nod. Compliment. Don't kill anyone. Isla gave her a sidelong glance. I can do 3 of those. Phoebe grinned. Good enough. The first dance of the evening approached, an obligatory performance for partners in the competition. Music swelled, a waltz both elegant and terrifyingly slow. Dance? Phoebe asked, eyebrow arched, hand extended. Isla stared at it like it was an engineering problem. I don't dance. Phoebe chuckled, tugging her lightly by the hand. You just calculated the risk. Don't think, just move. Isla's breath hitched. Then, slowly, she let herself be led. Their hands connected, fingers interlacing, shoulders brushing. She felt it, the precarious balance of trust, of chaos, of contact that wasn't part of a blueprint. Phoebe's voice was near her ear. You're a surprisingly good follower. Isla stiffened, then allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile. I adapt. Adaptation is sexy, Phoebe whispered, letting the words hang between them like a promise. Isla's cheeks warmed. She focused on the music, the sway, the strange exhilaration of moving in sync with someone who defied every one of her rules, but somehow made them work. Later, at the buffet, Phoebe leaned over Isla as she poured wine, voice playful and low. You know, you smile like that when nobody's watching. But tonight, it's almost dangerous. Isla raised an eyebrow. Dangerous. Very, Phoebe said, grinning. I could get used to it. Isla's jaw tightened, resisting a shiver that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. You're insufferable. I prefer irresistible, Phoebe corrected. And, just like that, the ballroom became a stage for more than performance. The teasing, the tension, the unspoken attraction, they were all out in the open now, hidden behind etiquette and gowns and polite laughter, but undeniable. By the end of the night, Isla found herself standing close enough to feel Phoebe's warmth behind her shoulder. The final toast echoed through the room, glasses clinking. Phoebe's hand brushed hers again, deliberate, electric. See, Phoebe whispered, barely audible over the crowd, we make a good team. Isla's lips curved into a small, restrained smile. We survive, she said, repeating the words she'd said once before, but this time, they carried weight. Phoebe laughed softly, leaning closer. Barely counts as living sometimes, but I'll take it. Isla allowed herself a tiny exhale, just long enough to let the truth slip in. Maybe surviving together was enough. And maybe, just maybe, it was finally fun. Chapter 12. The Grand Design. The first light of morning spilled across the Bali coastline, casting a golden sheen over the damp sand. Isla stood at the edge of their sight, clipboard in hand, measuring tape taut, eyes sharp as a hawk scanning the lines of their half-finished base. Every grain of sand mattered. Every angle had to hold. Phoebe arrived moments later, barefoot, carrying a bag of colored powders, a collection of driftwood, and half a dozen strange, unidentifiable tools that rattled like wind chimes in her tote. Morning, engineer, she said, grinning. Ready to make some chaos? Isla's lips twitched. Precision, Phoebe. We're making a design, not chaos. Phoebe twirled a handful of sand, letting it sprinkle like confetti. Precision and chaos. That's exactly what makes it beautiful. Isla's eyes narrowed. We'll see. They began with sketches in the sand, Isla drawing strict grids, clean angles, and mathematically perfect foundations, Phoebe overlaying them with spirals, arches, and curves that defied gravity, flowing like water through the rigid lines. At first, it felt impossible. Their hands collided constantly, tools crossing, spray bottles misting unpredictably. Stop spraying in my quadrant. Isla barked. I am your quadrant. Phoebe shot back, spinning and letting the mist arc over the curves she had just sculpted. You're destabilizing the West Wing. No, I'm enhancing the West Wing. Loosen up. And yet, slowly, inch by inch, They began to understand each other's rhythms. Isla noticed how Phoebe's chaotic touches accentuated the angles she so carefully calculated. Phoebe realized the rules Isla followed gave her chaos a stage to shine. Hours passed. The sun climbed high, baking their sand sculpture into a living entity. "This is surprisingly elegant," Phoebe murmured, stepping back. "Your grids give my arches a place to breathe. And your curves soften the brutality," Isla admitted, tracing a delicate spiral with her fingertip. "Without collapsing anything." Phoebe's grin widened. "See? Told you. Precision needs chaos." Isla looked at her, chest tight, pulse racing, not from the sun, but from the closeness, the laughter, the shared obsession with something fleeting, something alive. They worked side by side, hands sticky with wet sand, sunburn creeping along their shoulders. The ethereal city rose like a living dream, soaring towers, delicate flying buttresses, bridges that curled like waves, arches that caught the morning light like liquid. At one point, a small section began to sag. Isla froze, panic flaring. "Phoebe, watch that corner," she snapped. Phoebe leaned over, her fingers brushing Isla's as she reinforced the base. "I've got it. Trust me." Isla's breath caught, but she let herself. Not entirely. Just enough to feel the thrill of collaboration, the adrenaline of shared creation. By late afternoon, the sculpture had grown into something neither of them could have imagined alone. Sunlight caught every curve and edge, shadows dancing across the intricate network of towers, arches, and spirals. It was fragile, precarious, stunning, alive. Phoebe brushed a strand of hair from her face, sand clinging to her damp skin. "You know," she said softly, "this might actually win us the contract." Isla didn't reply immediately. She simply stepped closer, running her hand along a perfectly carved buttress that had once been only Phoebe's chaos. "Or maybe," she said finally, voice low, "it just proves we can survive the storm together." Phoebe's grin was quiet now, almost tender. "I like that version too." They stood there, shoulder to shoulder, watching their city shimmer in the golden light. A structure that could fall at any moment, but also, in its own way, could last forever. And for the first time, they both knew this wasn't just a sculpture. It was them. Chapter 13. The 48-hour final. The first whistle of the competition echoed across the beach, sharp and unforgiving. The judges' tents gleamed in the sunlight, competitors already scurrying into position. Isla adjusted her gloves, scanning the meticulously measured base of the ethereal city. Every angle, every buttress, every fragile spiral had to survive the next 48 hours against wind, tide, and human error. Phoebe bounded up beside her, bare feet kicking up grains of sand, hair sticking to her damp forehead. "Ready to make history?" she asked, grin wild and fearless. Isla's joy tightened. "Ready to survive." The first hours were methodical chaos. Isla dictated load distributions, moisture ratios, and reinforcement angles with precise authority, while Phoebe flitted between sculpting spirals, adding delicate arches, and sprinkling colored powders to catch the morning light. Their hands collided constantly. Tools crossed. Water sprayed unpredictably. And yet, the sculpture rose, taller, more intricate, more alive with every passing hour. By hour 12, exhaustion had begun to fray their edges. Isla's movements were sharper, more impatient. Phoebe's chaotic energy was tempered only by sheer adrenaline. A wall started to sag. Isla froze, panic flaring. "Phoebe, look." "The northwest tower," she snapped, voice tight. Phoebe leaned over, fingers brushing Isla's as she reinforced the base. "I've got it. Trust me." Isla exhaled, letting herself, just a fraction, believe in Phoebe's touch. Their hands lingered, electricity passing unnoticed, until reality intruded again, sand, tide, and time. By hour 24, delirium set in. The tide had shifted, shadows lengthened, and the world had narrowed to sand, spray bottles, and the relentless heat. They whispered, argued, laughed through exhaustion, the banter sharper and closer now than ever. "You're insane," Isla panted, misting a delicate arch. "You're terrified," Phoebe shot back, carving a spiral with precision only she could pull off. "And?" Phoebe's grin was a mixture of mischief and something softer. "And I like it." The night descended. Floodlights blazed, illuminating towers and arches, casting long shadows that danced across the sand. They worked shoulder to shoulder, moving in a rhythm neither had anticipated, reacting instinctively to every sag, every wobble, every gust of wind. By hour 40, fatigue had them both staggering, limbs stiff, voices hoarse. And then came the unexpected, a sudden gust, far stronger than predicted, threatening the highest towers. Isla's hands froze, panic sharpening her focus. "Phoebe?" "The spiral, hold it." "Now." Phoebe leapt, fingers digging into wet sand, tucking the curve back into alignment. "I'm holding it." "You think I'd let it fall?" Isla's breath hitched. In that moment, all the walls of precision, control, and professionalism fell away. They were just two people, hands intertwined with sand and salt water, hearts pounding, working as one. The tower shivered under the assault, but held. Phoebe laughed, breathless and wild. "See? I told you, chaos with trust can survive anything." Isla's lips twitched into a small, reluctant smile. "Barely counts as living," she murmured, echoing her own words from earlier. By the 48th hour, they were delirious, exhausted, exhilarated. The ethereal city gleamed under the rising sun, a testament to balance, risk, and improbable collaboration. Phoebe leaned back against the base, letting the last of her strength drain into sand. "We did it," she whispered. Isla crouched beside her, hand brushing against Phoebe's in a fleeting, electric touch. "We survived," she corrected. Phoebe's grin was soft now, intimate. "Barely," she said, echoing Isla's earlier words with a wink. For once, the sand wasn't the only thing precarious. Their partnership, their trust, their hearts, they had survived too. And, just maybe, they had built something permanent in the midst of all the impermanence. Trembles, the sky roars, and hearts finally break open. Chapter 14. The Collapse, the Emotional Kind. The sky turned a bruised purple, rolling clouds snarling above the Bali coastline. Winds shredded the calm, tugging at umbrellas, flinging wet leaves across the sand, and lifting the scent of the ocean into a raw, metallic tang. The ethereal city trembled under the gusts, spires leaning, arches shivering. Isla's chest tightened. Her fingers curled around her trowel like it could save the sculpture. "Phoebe, the tower's there." "Going to fight back," Phoebe finished, grabbing Isla's arm and pulling her toward the equipment tent. They dove inside as sheets of rain slapped the sand, turning it into rivers that snaked between their feet. Inside, the canvas walls flapped violently. The world was reduced to the smell of wet sand, rainwater dripping from their hair, the constant drum of the storm. They were soaked to the bone. Clothes clung, sand ground into every fold, every crease. I can't control this," Isla admitted, voice tight, jaw working against the words. "I hate losing control." Phoebe's hand found hers, fingers brushing and then gripping firmly. "I know. I hide behind chaos, but maybe you and we don't need control. Not like this. Not together." The storm rattled the tent walls, and outside, sandcastles quivered under the assault of wind and tide. Inside, however, a different storm raged inside their chests, inside their heads. The tension, the attraction, the longing, they had denied it, disguised it under banter and discipline. Phoebe leaned closer, brushing wet strands of hair from Isla's face. "You don't have to be strong all the time," she whispered. Not with me. Isla's throat tightened. I I don't. I don't know how to. Phoebe's lips met hers in a tentative, urgent kiss, wet and salty, a spark igniting against the storm's roar. Hands tangled in hair, arms wrapped around torsos, hearts pounding in sync with the thunder outside. Hours blurred. They whispered confessions between kisses, Isla admitting her fear of unpredictability, Phoebe revealing how she masked fear behind chaos and laughter. Sand stuck to them, sweat and rain mixed, but nothing mattered except this connection, trust, vulnerability. They finally paused, leaning foreheads together, breath mingling in the cramped tent. Isla's hands trembled as they traced Phoebe's damp shoulders. I've never felt this. With anyone, she confessed, voice low and raw. Phoebe smiled, soft and teasing, yet fierce. Me neither. Maybe because we're perfect chaos together. Outside, the storm waned, the rain tapering into a drizzle. The first light of dawn cut through clouds, casting silver and gold across the wet beach. They emerged cautiously from the tent, arms brushing, sand coating skin like a glittering armor. The ethereal city had taken a beating, towers leaned precariously, arches sagged, some delicate spirals had crumbled, but it still stood, resilient and alive. Isla ran her hand along a battered buttress. It's still here, she whispered. Phoebe leaned into her side. Just like us, she said softly. They stood together in silence, letting the wind dry their clothes, letting the sand fall from their hair, letting the storm's fury give way to something calmer, something steadier. And for the first time, Isla allowed herself to imagine that maybe perfection wasn't the goal. That survival, that vulnerability, that chaos and trust interwoven, that could be more lasting than anything she'd ever built. Chapter 15. The Result. The sun climbed higher, scattering light across the Bali shore. The storm had left everything raw, sand washed into tiny rivers, driftwood scattered like confetti, and the ethereal city standing battered but unbowed. Isla and Phoebe stepped out of the tent, still damp, sand crusted to their skin, hair matted, but neither of them cared. Their eyes locked on their creation. Some arches leaned precariously, towers wobbled like exhausted sentinels, yet the sculpture had survived. Phoebe laughed, breathless, spinning in the sand and throwing her arms wide like she owned the world. Look at it. Look at us. We did this. Isla shook her head, half in disbelief, half in awe. We survived. That's all I wanted. Phoebe snagged Isla's hand, tugging her close. We survived and we impressed everyone. I think we might be unstoppable. The judges emerged, clipboard in hand, murmuring to one another. Isla stiffened, every instinct screaming to check every angle, every foundation. Phoebe nudged her. Relax. Let me handle the charm portion. You've got the brains covered. Isla raised an eyebrow. Charm, huh? Phoebe winked, her signature chaotic grin flashing in the sun. Exactly. Now smile. At me. Not them. Reluctantly, Isla let herself soften. The sun caught her damp hair, the sand clinging to her sleeves, and for the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to be fully present, not calculating, not controlling, just here. The announcement came like a wave crashing over them. While the Golden Shovel goes to the traditional team this year, the duo division winners, Isla Vance and Phoebe Rossi, have secured the coastal restoration contract. Phoebe leapt forward, yanking Isla into a spin, their laughter mingling with the gulls' cries. We did it. Oh my God, we actually did it. Isla laughed, surprised at how light her chest felt, the weight of fear and perfection evaporating in Phoebe's reckless, radiant joy. Yes, we did. Phoebe caught her in a sudden embrace, squeezing tightly. You see? Chaos and precision can survive a hurricane. Isla's lips curved into a real smile, playful and soft. Barely, she muttered, echoing their nights of delirium, yet her eyes were bright with thrill. Phoebe grabbed Isla's hand. Contract. Together. That's forever, right? Isla squeezed back, heart swelling. Forever, if we want it to be. They wandered along the shoreline afterward, the rising sun gilding the waves. Phoebe kicked up sand, letting it scatter across Isla's boots. You know, this contract, it's huge. Permanent structures, serious responsibility. Isla smirked. Permanent structures are my specialty. Phoebe bumped her shoulder. Permanent partnerships are mine. I say we merge specialties. Isla laughed, a sharp, delighted sound. You really do have a way with chaos, huh? I have a way with you, Phoebe replied, teasing, eyes glinting. And this is the best thing we've ever built. Their hands found each other's, fingers intertwining naturally, effortlessly. The footprints they left in the sand behind them were a record of every heated argument, every flirtatious glance, every long night of shared toil and whispered confessions. Phoebe leaned her forehead against Isla's. So, next project? Isla's gaze softened, the sun catching her eyes like gold. Next project is everything. Us. Sand, stone, water, chaos. And maybe a little love. Phoebe laughed, brushing sand off Isla's shoulder, then caught her hand. Permanent enough? Isla squeezed back, teasing and tender all at once. Permanent enough. For now. They stepped into the sunlight together, leaving behind the battered but proud, ethereal city, their triumph reflected not just in the sculpture, but in the spark between them, the kind of spark that could survive storms, sabotage, and sleepless nights. Because they had built more than towers and arches. They had built trust. They had built partnership. They had built something that would last. And somewhere deep inside, both of them knew this was only the beginning. Epilogue: The Union of the Craft. A year had passed since the Bali competition, but the memory of wind-whipped sand, salt-stung skin, and adrenaline-fueled nights still lingered between them, like a private joke written in footprints along the shore. Isla Vance and Phoebe Rossi were no longer just a duo in the world of sandcastle mastery. They were partners in life, in love, and in every chaotic, beautiful endeavor they dared to take on. The engagement had been spontaneous, a quiet sunset on a Cape Town beach, just the two of them. Phoebe had dug a small hollow in the sand, sprinkled colored powders, and planted a ring at the center of a tiny, delicate spiral. Will you build the rest of your life with me? Phoebe had asked, laughing, hands covered in wet sand. Isla, initially skeptical, had dropped to one knee in response, though her movements were as precise as her engineering calculations, and whispered, I suppose I could survive that kind of chaos. Phoebe had hugged her, laughing, kissing her, and tossing sand into the wind. Permanent enough? Permanent enough, Isla had replied, letting herself be swept away. Now, in Jamaica, the sun poured over white sands, turquoise water lapping at their feet. The wedding was small, intimate, and exactly their style. Isla in a structured, elegant gown, Phoebe in a playful, flowing suit, barefoot in the sand. Guests marveled at the subtle details, tiny sand sculptures along the aisle, arches and spirals echoing the ethereal city they had built together. I still can't believe you convinced me to let the sand be part of the wedding decor, Isla muttered, brushing a strand of wind-tossed hair behind her ear. Phoebe grinned. See? Chaos and precision. Works every time. They exchanged vows, laughter and tears mingling freely, voices carrying over the surf. I promise, Isla said, voice steady, eyes locked on Phoebe's, to trust you with every project, every plan, every chaotic, unpredictable corner of my heart. Phoebe laughed, leaning in to kiss her. And I promise to bring the chaos, the glitter, and the wild, messy magic to every day we share. The rings slipped onto their fingers, small bands of gold that caught the sun like little sparks. And then, hand in hand, They walked into the surf, letting the waves lap at their ankles. Sand stuck to wet skin, laughter tumbled into the wind, and for a moment, everything, the chaos, the precision, the love, was perfect. Back in Cape Town, they settled into a loft overlooking the ocean, a space both structured and wild. Plans for the next coastal restoration projects line the walls, alongside sketches, mood boards, and spontaneous bursts of glitter and color. Isla calculated measurements while Phoebe added flourishes, and together they built not just structures, but a life, imperfect, breathtaking, and entirely theirs. Every sandcastle, every tower, every fleeting masterpiece had been practice. Because now, they were building something permanent, a home, a partnership, a future, and nothing, not storm, tide, or chaos, could ever topple it. And somewhere between the glittering arches of their imagination and the precision of their reality, Isla whispered to Phoebe, hand in hand. Next project. Phoebe smiled, eyes bright as sunlight on water. Forever. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe and like this video and follow me for more stories. You are always welcome here, and leave me a comment or a thumbs up, just letting me know if you like the story and would like more, or is there perhaps an idea that you would like to share or let me write for you.